Okay, so my name's Steven Cochrane, and I'm a partner in the employment and reward practice at Pinsent Masons in London.
Great, thank you. Stephen, I'll ask you to give me a bit of your time. We're going to sort of record for 10, maybe 15 minutes max. We've got an event coming up, which is increasing employee engagement and retention. What part does wellbeing play and why does it matter? And that's going to be held at your London offices on Tuesday, 3rd of July from 8 to 9:30 a.m. Really going out to HR directors, HR managers, anyone who's responsible for resilience, for performance, for wellbeing within their organisation. I just wanted to ask some questions of you from a legal context. I mean, well-being is a word that's used a lot. It's been bandied around a lot at the moment. Some think it's quite a soft term, some like it. What does it mean in a legal context?
Okay, I mean, I think that the first thing that I would say is, the law is obviously important, but I sometimes think it's quite unhelpful to think about well-being through a sort of legal prism, because I think quite often what that leads to is, kind of compliance-led approach to well-being, which is quite unhelpful, I think. So sort of questions like, what does the law say? What do we need to do? What can we not do? What are the liabilities if we do X, Y, or Z? And actually, I think when you think about well-being from that place, it's almost counterproductive. The question should be around, what makes our employees happy? What are the stressors in the workplace, and how do we, mitigate those factors, or even eradicate them? So that's the first thing I would say. I guess just to sort of kind of set the scene. I think the law obviously is important. It sets a framework. It provides for redress, I guess, if things go wrong. I think in terms of well-being, what does well-being mean from a legal perspective? I mean, I think quite often, the jump from well-being to stress at work is an obvious one. It's almost the opposite of well-being. And there are, a number of legal protections, in that space. From a statutory perspective, we have a whole raft of employment legislation that deals with, stress at work and well-being more broadly. Again, from a statutory perspective, we have, a whole raft of European and domestic health and safety legislation. And then, of course, we have common law obligations, common law duties of care, to basically to provide a safe working environment. And all of those things, I think, are highly relevant from a sort of well-being and employee engagement perspective.
Has the law...
Would it be helpful?
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, would it be helpful to run through some of those, some of those sort of key legal?
Yes, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I guess to run through them. So health and safety at work, I think is sort of very important piece of legislation from a wellbeing perspective. So we have the Health and Safety at Work Act, and what that does, I guess in broad terms, creates a legal responsibility for employers to reduce the risk of stress-related illnesses to the extent possible. And then there are also statutory duties, to carry out risk assessments in order to mitigate the risk of stress-related illnesses. As I mentioned, there's a whole raft of employment legislation that I think is relevant in this well-being space. So we have the Equality Act, which covers disability discrimination. The definition of disability is very wide, and very often, where there's mental health issues at work, they will be classed as a disability in law. So we have direct disability, we have indirect disability, we have failure to make reasonable adjustments. So that's situations where an individual is disabled in law, and the employer has an obligation to make reasonable accommodations to help that individual do their job, notwithstanding notwithstanding the condition that they're suffering from. We also have the working time regulations. Again, they're EU derived, so things like rest breaks, things like how many hours a week you should work, rules in relation to night shift workers, etc. Obviously, relevant from a wellbeing perspective. And then I think also flexible working, which always comes up, whenever you have a conversation about wellbeing. And I think the important thing to say there is that, whereas before where flexible working applied really only to parents and carers, a few years ago it was opened up to, to all employees. that is always, I think, always part of the conversation when we're talking about well-being at work.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I mean, what are the legal implications of a company not having a well-being strategy, or put another way, a retention strategy? Because I think well-being, very broad term, but really it's about some of the things you've defined from a legal perspective, but taking care of people so they can bring their best selves to work. Perhaps, we've definitely seen a bleed of work into people's personal lives, maybe a bit of a bleed of personal lives into work, so there's less separation. But also, some of the things you've touched on, working hours, flexible working makes such a big difference to people's well-being, the ability to work from home on occasion, save themselves a commute, all these kind of things. And forward-thinking companies are starting to have a strategy around this, not just to attract new talent, but also to help retain people. I mean, a company wants a certain amount of churn, I suppose, but you also want to hold on to your key performers. So what are the legal implications of not having a policy or a strategy around that?
I mean, I think the practical implications are obvious. You've just touched on them. I think legally, at the sharp end, it's litigation. It's where these things go wrong. Employees, will often feel that they have no other option than to seek legal advice, and that often results in claims. So you could be looking at a personal injury claim. There could be, damages for psychiatric injury. There could be constructive dismissal claims where employees feel that the work environment is so toxic that that they treat themselves as having been dismissed and bring a claim on that basis. I touched on disability discrimination. Disability claims are extremely difficult. Require quite often lots and lots of medical evidence. It can be very protracted. Litigation in itself is highly stressful for all parties involved, but particularly I think for claimant. Often unrepresented, can be very expensive. In terms of the exposure for the employer, obviously there's a franchise risk around, the publicity. Employment tribunals are public hearings. But from a financial perspective, unlike, say, for example, an unfair dismissal claim where there's a statutory cap on compensation, there's no ceiling on liability for discrimination claims. Really? So if you have a disability discrimination claim, they can be very, very expensive. I think particularly where you have serious psychiatric illness. Let's say, for example, an individual may be claiming for career-long losses. They may be in a position where their loss of earnings or loss of pension run through all the way to retirement because their condition is such that they are never going to be able to work at the same level again, or perhaps work at all. So really serious stuff, I think.
Yeah, indeed. And from your perspective, are you seeing more and more of these cases?
I think so. I mean, I think, the employment tribunal fees have been eradicated now. So, certainly from an access to justice perspective, we're seeing an uptick in all types of claims. I think, we have seen an uptick in discrimination claims more generally, quite often sex discrimination rather than disability discrimination. But certainly litigation on a whole is definitely on the rise. I think employees are generally more plugged into, their rights, and their employer's obligations from a well-being perspective. And I think mental health awareness is increasing, hugely. Even just over the past 2 or 3 years, let alone the past decade. And I think that does create an environment where people are more likely, to be open about their own sort of personal journeys. But where that goes wrong, more likely to follow legal avenues in order to force their employers to do what they ought to do, and if they won't, seek compensation.
Yeah, and I think the environment is changing as well. We're working in some sectors, and arguably people are working harder. They're hyper connected with technology. A lot of people have got dependents, whether it's young children or older dependents, and the pressures on people now, I think, have increased. And I think technology does play a huge part in that. So it's important to have a policy in place that helps you to look after people, not just to avoid expensive claims or claims at all, but I think it's the right and the ethical thing to do. And I think in future, companies won't attract new talent with corner offices, with cars, with good salary packages. All of that might factor. But I think the thing that will differentiate the next generation coming up is, well, what do you do, at the simplest level? Do I have to take holiday to take a child to the doctor or an animal to the vet? all the way to what strategies do you put in place to avoid my stress levels become toxic? Is there a policy of standing meetings, walking meetings? Is it am I able to be fairly active in my role? If I need to, can I work remotely? Can I work flexibly? It's not radical stuff. I mean, even possibly having people working according to their chronotypes. So if you're a morning person, you can come and do an 8 till 4 shift. And if you're an afternoon person, you do a 10 till 6 or something like that. So even that kind of thing, I think we're going to see more and more of. But that brings me to my last question. Do you have any examples? I'm sure they'll remain nameless, but that you can discuss of a company that's done it very, very well, or perhaps not so well, and they've made some sort of costly errors or oversights?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just sort of given what I do, I tend to see, I tend to see things that have gone wrong more often than success stories for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, we've probably all heard of, suicides at work, and certainly, in my career, I've seen that, 2 or 3 times, very, very sad, very unusual. But that's probably, the height of when things have gone really, really badly wrong. I think what we see more often, situations where employees, are suffering, from, stress at work, that's exacerbated quite often by, poor management, lack of support, lack of empathy, quite often a sort of lack of education around mental health awareness, because of course, our very large clients tend to be relatively enlightened. They're quite forward thinking. Quite often they have, champions who are sort of pushing this agenda, and that's fantastic. But not all employers have that level of investment or that level of awareness. I think smaller organisations, I think, are probably a decade behind, where sort of UK PLC is. And I think that's where we'll continue to see issues and problems. And for example, I'm dealing with an employment tribunal claim at the moment where the lady has been off work now for, I think, 9 years, since 2008, 10 years. And so she's been signed onto a permanent health insurance, so the insurer is, essentially paying her salary or a portion of her salary. And that's really sad. The backstory is quite tragic, but, at least in part, I think part of her, condition was, definitely, if not caused, added to by workplace stressors. And I think she's now in a place where it's highly unlikely that she's ever going to come back to the workplace. She's in a very bad place, and I think that could have been avoided. I think in terms of success stories, I think employers who have excellent retention and their attrition rates are very positive. That's the best success story I think you can have. But I guess in terms of the thing that sticks out in my mind, I have one client who I think sort of 2-3 years ago, again, it was an employee who'd been on a PHI scheme for a long time. So this gentleman had been out of the organisation for it was over 15 years, a really, really long time, and very unusually. I mean, this doesn't happen very often, but the insurer signed him off as being fit to go back to work. Now, the organisation obviously in 15 years had changed fundamentally. I mean, it had gone through various M&A transactions. None of the personnel that were there when this gentleman was due to return were there when he left, so he didn't know anybody. The organisation was completely unrecognisable, but they had a very I guess enlightened HR department, and they essentially rather than starting to talk to us about, well, what do we do with this guy? Do we make him redundant? Is there some legal basis on which we can say, well, there's no job for you? The structure has changed so much in the past 15 years. What they did was they engaged with them. They engaged with him. They engaged with his GP. They spoke to him about what he wanted, and they essentially created a role for him. And the role that he'd left, a decade and a half before, obviously didn't exist anymore. And that gentleman has been back in the workplace. He's now in his 60s. He's been back there for for the past 3 or 4 years. And I think that that to me sticks out in my head is just a huge success story in terms of an employer that's sort of willing to really push the envelope and not take a compliance-led approach. I mean, I talked about that earlier, and they didn't look at this issue through the prism of what are the liabilities if we get rid of this chap, they very much looked at it as, this is an individual who worked for us for 20 years. For the past 15 years has struggled, and he's now, he now has an opportunity to reintegrate. How can we make that happen? And I think that I found very impressive.
Yeah. And that kind of thing gets out and people are aware of that, and it just boosts, it makes that organisation an aspirational place to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's some others. Sleep is obviously a very, very big one for well-being. And there's companies like Ben & Jerry's and Zappos in the US who have sleep pods in their offices now. So you can just go, you can catch a nap for 20 minutes, and that's you sort of, there's scientific studies that have proved that it revitalizes you, it gets you sharper again, and more productive for the afternoon. I mean, that's not that radical an idea, really. I mean, there's lots
No, it's not. It shouldn't be. It seems like it is, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about all of this stuff and a lot more in the event that's coming up. So if you're watching or listening, Stephen, I don't think you'll be there, will you? But somebody from Pinsent Masons will be. And obviously you're hosting the event. So it's Tuesday, 3rd of July, 8 a.m. to 9:30, increasing employee engagement and retention. What part does wellbeing play and why does it matter? Well, we'll talk about some of the stuff that Stephen and I have touched on, but also the bulk of the session will be about wellbeing, performance, resilience, and how you can increase that, drive more energy through your organisation. So tickets are available on Eventbrite, which I'll link to on the audio and the visual of this video. Stephen, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I don't think so. The one thing I just wanted to touch on really briefly was technology. I know you touched on that earlier, and hopefully it'll be covered off in the session, but I think that's a really interesting one, because I think quite a lot of our clients really struggle with, trying to bespoke their approach to well-being in the workplace, because there are some employees who find BlackBerry, iPhone, remote working, having access to the system, being able to work from home. They find that really empowering. It allows them to, sort of blend their work life with their personal life in a way that really helps them, and sort of keep their plate spinning, so to speak. There are other employees who find it, invasive and intrusive and actually quite stressful. They don't want to work from home. They like that compartmentalization. They like to have their office, and they like to have, their home life, and they like to leave their personal issues at the office door, or at the factory floor, wherever they work. They don't particularly want to be checking their emails on a Sunday afternoon when they're at a children's party. Actually, I think that can be really, really difficult for employers, because I think there's sometimes an assumption that flexible working, agile working, remote access, etc., is a great thing, and that it unlocks potential and it empowers people. And my personal view is that's absolutely the case. But there are certainly dozens, hundreds, thousands of employees who feel very differently, and and they actually find this whole move, sort of technological advancement that is really merging, the sort of workplace, with the sort of family life, highly intrusive and stressful. And certainly that's something that a lot of my clients are really, struggling to, try and find an approach that, that works for everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, let's not forget we're having this discussion about well-being using technology. I meditate to an app. Of course, there's other ways you can meditate. It doesn't need an app. But yet the mobile phone devices, can cause a lot of problems. A lot of us use our email as an inbox. We have this binging and dinging and whirring every 2 minutes and distracting us. So, yeah, we will talk about technology at the event. And I forgot to mention that tickets are free to register for, but we are nearly at capacity. We've got something like 5 or 6 tickets left. So we will soon be sold out and full up. So anyway, I'm going to sign off. I'm aware that we're on our time limit. We're a little bit over. Stephen, thank you very much.
No problem.
Much appreciated.
Thanks, Leanne. Thank you.
Thank you.